Most people believe the law of assumption is about thinking harder. They repeat affirmations. They visualize longer. They try to feel something they don't yet feel. And when it doesn't work, they assume they're doing it wrong. But here is the hidden truth. The law of assumption doesn't fail because you're not trying enough. It fails because you're trying at all. Neville Goddard never taught force. He never taught strain. He never taught emotional pressure. Yet modern teachings quietly turned assumption into effort. Affirm harder. Visualize more. Convince yourself. But effort carries a signal. Effort says, "I don't have it yet." And the mind listens. Most people don't notice this because it feels productive. But the moment you try to assume, you split yourself in two. One part imagining, one part watching and doubting. This is where power leaks away. But assumption only works when the mind is not arguing with itself. And this is why so many people feel tired, even while manifesting. Because the real mistake was never belief. It was interference. And once you see this, the entire law begins to change. But what happens next is even more important. Power doesn't disappear all at once. It leaks, quietly, daily, almost invisibly. Most people think assumption fails because reality didn't respond. But in truth, reality was responding, just not to their words. It was responding to their state. Here's where awareness disappears. Every time you check for results, every time you wonder, is this working? Every time you adjust, correct, or repeat out of fear, you step out of assumption. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough to collapse it. Modern life makes this worse. Constant noise, constant comparison, constant stimulation. The mind never rests long enough to let an assumption settle. So people keep adding effort, more affirmations, more techniques, more rules. But assumption doesn't grow from noise. It grows from stillness. And this is the paradox most people miss. The harder you push the mind, the more it resists. The more you monitor your state, the more you signal lack. Most people don't notice this because it feels responsible. But responsibility is not the same as power. Assumption begins working only when the mind stops checking itself. And this is why monks spoke of silence, why mystics warned against mental chatter, why Neville emphasized feeling, not forcing. Because the moment you stop interfering, the mind naturally settles into what it assumes. And this is where something unexpected happens. But what happens next is even more important. There is a moment, so subtle, most people miss it. It happens when you stop trying to assume and simply notice what's happening inside. Thoughts continue, images still appear, feelings rise and fall, but something else becomes clear. You are aware of them. That awareness was always here. Before the affirmation, before the visualization, before the desire. Neville hinted at this quietly. He spoke of imagination not as effort, but as a state you rest in. Ancient monks spoke of it differently. They called it the witness, the silent watcher. Buddhism called it awareness. Taoism called it the unmoving center. Different names, same truth. Assumption does not happen inside thought. It happens before thought. Most people try to change the movie on the screen without realizing they are the screen. This is why effort collapses assumption. Because the moment you try, you move into the character. You forget the observer. And this is where awareness disappears. But when you notice the one who is noticing, something relaxes. Thoughts lose urgency. Feelings soften. The body exhales. In this state, assumption becomes natural, not forced, not repeated, not chased. It's simply allowed. And this is the part most teachings rush past, because if you understand this, you no longer need techniques. But what happens next is where ancient wisdom and modern science meet. Long before manifestation became a technique, ancient traditions were already warning about effort. Not because effort is wrong, but because effort belongs to the mind. And the mind was never the source of power. In the Vedas, awareness was described as that which remains when thought becomes silent. In Buddhism, monks were taught not to control the mind, but to observe it. Taoist texts spoke of wu-wei, action without force, movement without strain. Even Neville echoed this quietly. He never said, "Convince yourself." He said, "Assume." And assumption, in its original meaning, meant to rest upon, not to push, not to argue, not to persuade. Ancient teachers understood something modern life forgot. Reality responds to being, not to mental effort. This is why silence was sacred, why monasteries were built far from noise, why seekers were told to watch the breath, not as ritual, but as a doorway. Because when the mind grows quiet, assumption becomes effortless, the state settles, identity softens, and reality adjusts naturally. Modern teachings reversed this. They added steps, rules, endless repetition. But the ancients knew, the more you try to move the river, the more you disturb its flow. And this is where science begins to agree. Because what monks observed inwardly, neuroscience later measured. What ancient monks felt through silence, modern science discovered through observation. Neuroscience shows something fascinating. The brain does not respond most strongly to what you say. It responds to what you expect. There is a system in the brain that filters reality based on identity. It decides what you notice, what feels possible, what feels familiar, and it works automatically. When you try to assume, the nervous system detects effort. Effort signals uncertainty. Uncertainty signals lack. The body tightens. The mind watches itself. This is why forcing belief feels exhausting. But when awareness is calm, when attention rests instead of pushes, the brain updates identity quietly. Old patterns lose energy. New assumptions feel natural, not because you repeated them, but because resistance faded. This is why psychology calls this identity reinforcement. The brain looks for evidence that matches who you believe you are. So when you stop checking, stop correcting, stop trying, the assumption becomes who you are being, and reality reflects that. This is why observation changes behavior faster than willpower. This is why silence stabilizes intention. And this is why Neville said, feeling is the secret. Not emotion, familiarity. The calm sense of, this is normal for me. And now we arrive at the turning point. Because once you understand this, you stop asking how to assume and start noticing what's been blocking it all along. Effort feels responsible. It feels like doing something, like taking control, like moving closer. But effort carries a quiet message. It says, this isn't true yet. And the mind believes messages more than it believes words. Most people don't realize this, because effort looks like discipline. But assumption doesn't respond to discipline. It responds to identity. The moment you force a feeling, the body tightens, the breath shortens, the mind starts watching. And now there are two of you, one trying to assume, one checking if it worked. This split collapses the state, because assumption requires oneness, not tension, not monitoring, not control. Neville warned about this indirectly. He spoke of falling asleep in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not repeating it, not testing it, not proving it. Sleep requires surrender. You cannot force yourself to sleep. The more you try, the more awake you become. Assumption works the same way. It arrives when the mind stops pushing and the body feels safe enough to settle. This is why silence matters, why breath slows everything down, why observation restores power. You don't assume by effort, you assume by not interfering. And this is where everything shifts. Because once effort drops, assumption becomes automatic. The law of assumption was never about creating something new. It was about settling into what you accept as normal. Most people think assumption means convincing the mind of a new story, but the mind resists persuasion. It doesn't resist familiarity. Assumption is not a technique. It is not repetition. It is not emotional intensity. It is a state of rest, a quiet agreement inside that says, this is how things are now. Neville never said to fight thoughts. He said to dwell in the end, to remain there, not to prove it, not to defend it. When you stop interfering, the mind naturally organizes itself around the assumed state. You don't force belief. Belief emerges when resistance disappears. This is why awareness is the key, because awareness doesn't argue, it observes. And whatever is observed without resistance stabilizes. So the law of assumption works like this. You notice the state you're in, you stop reacting to it, you allow a new state to feel ordinary, and reality follows. Not instantly, not dramatically, but inevitably. And once this clicks, you stop chasing outcomes, you stop checking signs, because something deeper takes over. Observation is not passive. It is transformative. The moment you observe a thought without correcting it, without following it, without resisting it, the thought loses authority. This is how old identities dissolve, not through force, not through repetition, but through non-reaction. Neuroscience shows that what you stop feeding slowly deactivates. Patterns weaken, emotional charge fades, and something subtle happens. The body relaxes into a new baseline. This baseline is the assumed state, not imagined, not acted, lived. When you rest as the observer, you are no longer reinforcing the old story. You are no longer confirming the past, and reality responds to that absence. This is why silence works, why breath anchors the state, why intention, when quiet, feels powerful. Because the nervous system finally feels safe enough to reorganize. And when identity shifts, circumstances follow. Not because you chased them, but because the old version of you is no longer there to recreate them. This is the real transformation. And now we arrive at the truth that was promised at the beginning. The law of assumption was never meant to control reality. It was meant to reveal who you already are being. Most people try to command the mind. They push thoughts, they chase feelings, they repeat words. But the secret was never control. It was allowance. Neville hinted at it in one simple line. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not force the feeling, not generate emotion. Assume it. Which means stop questioning it. The moment you stop interfering, the mind settles into agreement. And what the mind agrees with, reality reflects. You were never meant to struggle. You were meant to notice. And in that noticing, assumption becomes effortless. This is what most teachings never say, because it's too quiet, too simple. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you notice this, you can never unsee it. The effort you used to apply, the tension you carried, the constant checking, it was never needed. Assumption was never something to chase. It was something to stop disturbing. The observer was always here, waiting beneath the thoughts, beneath the noise, beneath the trying. And now, something has shifted. Not in the world, but in the way you see it. The real question is, will you return to effort or remain in awareness?